met her in a bar. It's not as bad as it sounds. I met her in a bar after I'd been golfing with a couple of friends, and these guys were actors and directors, and Marina was wandering through. So shortly after that, I told Marina that I was going to join the RCMP, and she laughed. And then I said, no, really, I'm going to join the RCMP, and she laughed. And I think it took about an hour before she realized that I was serious. And so it was about a year and a half later, we were on our way to Alberta in a car, a Honda Civic stuffed full of things. That was just about everything we owned. And we ended up in a rickety old farmhouse just outside of Mayerthorpe.
We got to know Mayerthorpe pretty well in the 5 years we were there because there was nothing else to do but get to know the town and the family and the people. And because I was the newspaper editor there too. And because Peter was in the RCMP. Not that I ever knew anything because he didn't tell me anything. And when we came... You're both now on record, so. Yeah, it's a joke at any detachment he's ever worked at that, you know, people will phone me up and tell me stuff that they think I ought to know because they know he won't tell me. I think he thinks that just makes it safe. If he can never say anything he shouldn't say if he doesn't ever say anything.
The very crusty old sergeant dragged me in to make sure that I wasn't divulging any big secrets to the newspaper reporter, the cub reporter in town. And I think she would probably tell you that she'd be lucky to get anything out of me, story-wise. But there was a time when, around the anniversary of the D-Day landings, June 6th, she hired me. I wasn't paid very well, as I recall, but she hired me I'd worked as a newspaper reporter before joining the RCMP. So she needed some help, so she sent me out to go talk to one of the vets who lived in town, who I'd met before, I think through the Legion, and he had been in the engineers in the Second World War and landed at Juno Beach and carried on through France and the Netherlands and eventually into Germany. And so I sat down with him one lunchtime to get his story so I could write it up for the newspaper, and it was an incredible story, bearing in mind that at the time that he was in France, of course, he would have been younger than I was then. He would have been in his very early 20s, and he would have been a young officer. And he talked about the experience of Normandy and the experience of liberating towns in France. He actually resisted being interviewed at all because he had been interviewed in the past, and he was tired of telling these stories, I think. But he warmed up to it after a while, and he explained how he had landed on June 6th, not in the first wave, but third or fourth wave, and came in and cleared some of the obstacles on the beach. Really interesting fellow, really upright, military-bearing, pencil mustache, and the whole thing. And near the end of the conversation, I'd probably been there about 2 or 3 hours, he asked if he had gone back to France to participate in, I guess it must have been the 50th anniversary of the landings. So he went to participate in the anniversary celebrations that they had there. And they presented him with a medal. So I asked to see the medal, and he brought the medal out. And he had commented that it was a nice little token, but it was in French, the inscription on this medal, so he thought that was a little bit odd since all the liberators were by and large from English-speaking countries. And so I looked at the inscription on the medal, and it was of course written in French, but I recognized it. I recognized the quote from it. And give us that quote. Yeah, translated into English, it was "wound my heart with a monotonous languor." And I'd like to say I recognized it because I was a poet in a previous life, but I recognized it because I used to read a lot of books about the war, and foremost among them was Cornelius Ryan's book called The Longest Day. So I sort of racked my brain a little bit, and I said to this fella, you know what, I recognize this from a book, from the book The Longest Day. To which he replied, well, I'm in The Longest Day. Okay, so he went and grabbed the book and grabbed the book out, and he showed me that in the index there he was listed under the veterans of the D-Day landings. And so then I leafed back to a page, I think it was in the photographs, it was easy to find in the middle. And then just in the description of what messages they're sending out coded messages, which happened to be lines of poetry in French, which went out over the radio lines to the French resistance. And those lines of poetry were the codes to tell the resistance cells in Normandy that the landings were about to happen. And so I showed this to the fella, and it was fantastic. It made the medal all that much more important to him, and he could place it in the context of this book that he knew, and I felt like that was a really valuable reason for me to be there. The article that I ended up writing was pretty much secondary to that.